My name is Lauren, and I'm going to tell you about the night my entire world crumbled before my eyes. Not in a dark room, not in a screaming argument, but at a dinner table, surrounded by everyone I loved, with a glass raised in the air and a smile I'll never forget. That was the night I learned that some people can rip your heart from your chest with the same ease they make a toast, and that true love sometimes hides the cruelest lie you could ever imagine. If you've ever felt that sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize something isn't right, if you've ever had the sensation that you were being deceived, but kept believing because loving was easier than doubting, then this story is for you. Before I continue, I need to ask you something from the heart. If you understand this kind of pain, if you've been through something similar, or know someone who has, leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications too, because I want more people to know they're not alone in this. I know how much it hurts to carry this kind of secret, and telling my story here is also a way to free myself, to transform this pain into strength for other people going through the same thing. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced something like this. I read every comment, and sometimes your stories give me more courage than you could imagine. Because when we share the pain, it becomes lighter, and when we see we're not alone, life starts to make sense again. I met David on a gray autumn afternoon in Atlanta, at a small coffee shop where rain was gently tapping against the window, and the smell of fresh coffee filled every corner of the place. I had gone there just to escape the storm that had caught me by surprise on my way, and it was when I ordered my cappuccino that our eyes met. He was sitting at a table near the window, with a book in his hands and a gentle smile on his lips. I can't explain it exactly, but at that moment something inside me whispered that this man would be important in my life, and he was, just not in the way I could ever have imagined. When he stood up and came over to me, offering to share the table because the cafe was packed, I felt that flutter in my stomach that you only feel when something special is about to happen. His voice was soft, warm, the kind that makes you feel safe instantly. We talked for hours that afternoon, and the rain outside seemed like a perfect soundtrack for that unexpected encounter. He told me about his work as an engineer, about how he had moved to Atlanta 2 years ago looking for a fresh start, about his passion for cooking and hiking in nature. I caught myself laughing at things that weren't even that funny, just because being near him seemed to light a flame I didn't even know was extinguished inside me. From that day on, everything flowed with frightening naturalness. David was different from all the other men I had known before. He would call me just to know how my day had been, send good morning texts with those silly emojis that made me smile alone at work, remember small details from our conversations that even I had forgotten. On our third date, he took me to an Italian restaurant where candlelight danced softly over the table, and it was there that he held my hand for the first time. His touch was firm but delicate, and in that instant I knew, or at least I thought I knew, that I was falling in love. The following months were like living inside a dream where everything goes right. We traveled whenever we could, small getaways to the North Carolina mountains, weekends in Charleston with its cobblestone streets and colorful houses. Once we even went camping in Georgia, and spent the whole night looking at the stars while he told me about constellations I had never noticed before. He had this special way of making the simplest things seem magical. A walk in the park would turn into an adventure. A dinner at home would become an elaborate gastronomic experience, where he cooked dishes he had learned by watching videos online. On Sundays, our routine was sacred. We would wake up late, have breakfast in bed while watching series we loved, and then spend the whole afternoon in the kitchen, trying new recipes and laughing at our disastrous attempts. He had a habit of playing old songs while cooking, and we would dance around the kitchen like two teenagers in love, not caring if the food was burning or if we were completely out of rhythm. It was these simple moments that I kept in my heart like precious treasures, because I truly believed that this was forever. We even had a bench at Grant Park that we called our bench, a wooden bench under a huge oak tree, from where you could see the lake and watch the ducks swimming peacefully. That's where we would go whenever we needed to talk about something important, or simply when we wanted to be in silence side by side, just existing together. I remember sitting there on a spring afternoon, with my head resting on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and thinking, this is the love of my life. How could I be so certain about something that was so wrong? After a year together, David proposed to me. It was on a Saturday night, after a dinner he had prepared at home. Grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, my favorite dish. He had decorated the entire living room with candles and put together a playlist with songs that marked our relationship. When he knelt down and opened that little box with the ring that sparkled under the soft candlelight, I didn't need to think twice. I said yes with tears streaming down my face, feeling that finally the universe had rewarded me for all the wrong loves of the past, for all the times I had bet on the wrong person and left with a broken heart. The wedding was small but perfect, just family and close friends, at an outdoor ceremony in a flower garden on the outskirts of Atlanta. I wore a simple white lace dress, with flowers in my hair, and when I walked toward the altar and saw David waiting there for me, with that radiant smile and eyes shining with emotion, I was absolutely certain I was making the right choice. My sister Rachel was there too, beautiful in a light pink dress as one of my bridesmaids. She had held my hand before the ceremony and said, "I'm so happy for you, Lauren." And I had hugged her with all my strength, grateful to have a sister so present in all the important moments of my life. But life has a cruel way of showing you that sometimes the things that seem most perfect are the ones most about to crumble. The first months of marriage were exactly as I had imagined. We lived in a cozy apartment in the Virginia Highland neighborhood, with large windows that let in the sunlight every morning, and a small balcony where we would have coffee together before leaving for work. I woke up every day feeling grateful for having found my place in the world, for having someone who loved me and whom I could love back without fear. David was attentive, affectionate, always surprising me with small gestures, flowers for no reason at all, notes left on the refrigerator, shoulder massages after a tiring day at the office. But then, something began to change. It was so subtle at first that I didn't really notice, like a shadow that grows slowly without you noticing until it has already swallowed all the light. David started coming home later, always with excuses about urgent projects at work. Last-minute meetings, tight deadlines. He who used to call me several times a day to know how I was, now went hours without responding to my messages. When I questioned him, he would sigh with impatience and say I was being too needy, that he had responsibilities and couldn't be glued to his phone all the time. I tried to believe him, because believing was easier than facing the possibility that something was wrong. After all, every relationship goes through more difficult phases, right? Every marriage has its ups and downs, its periods of distancing and reconnection. That's what I told myself every night as I waited for him to come home, sitting on the couch with dinner getting cold on the table, watching the clock mark hour after hour. But it wasn't just work. There were other signs, small things that alone meant nothing, but together began to form a disturbing pattern. His phone, which used to be thrown anywhere around the house, was now always face down, always on silent, always out of my reach. When he showered, he took his cell phone to the bathroom. When he slept, he put it under his pillow. When I asked if everything was okay, he would laugh in that forced way and say, "You've been too paranoid lately, Lauren. Maybe you should relax a little." And I would relax. I would swallow that bad feeling in my stomach, that tightness in my chest that would wake me up in the middle of the night, and decide to trust. Because to love was to trust, wasn't it? And I loved him. God, how I loved him. Even when he started touching me less and less, even when our kisses became automatic and emotionless, even when he would turn to his side and fall asleep without even saying goodnight, I kept believing it was just a phase. But something inside me was screaming louder and louder. It was as if a part of me, that instinctive part that we try to ignore because it says things we don't want to hear, knew that something very wrong was happening right under my nose. That's when I noticed that my sister Rachel had become too constant a presence in our lives. She had always been close to me. It was just the two of us, raised by our mother after our father left us when we were little. Rachel was 5 years younger than me, had just finished college, and was starting her career as a graphic designer. She was beautiful, outgoing, full of energy, the kind that makes people turn around when she enters a room. I had always been the more responsible, more serious sister, and Rachel was the one who brightened any environment with her contagious laughter. After my wedding, she started showing up at home more frequently. At first I loved it. It was nice to have my sister around, cooking together, watching movies on the couch while David worked on his computer. But gradually, I began to notice strange things. The way she and David laughed together at jokes I didn't understand, as if they shared a private secret. the quick glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't paying attention, the way he always offered to give her a ride, even when it wasn't on the way. Once I came home early from work and found the two of them in the kitchen, very close to each other, and when I walked in, they quickly moved apart, with that strange smile of someone caught doing something they shouldn't. I was just showing David some photos from my new project, Rachel explained, but her voice sounded too high-pitched, too fake. David just smiled and left the kitchen, leaving an uncomfortable silence between me and my sister. I started paying more attention. I noticed that when Rachel texted, David would always grab his phone immediately, even when he was in the middle of a conversation with me. I noticed that he mentioned my sister with strange frequency. Rachel said this. Rachel suggested that. Rachel thinks we should try such and such. It was as if she had become part of our relationship in a way I hadn't authorized, but also didn't know how to prevent. One night, I woke up in the early hours and realized David wasn't in bed. I went looking for him and found him in the living room, in the dark, typing furiously on his phone with that bluish light illuminating his face. When he saw me, he jumped and hid the phone so quickly he almost dropped it. "What are you doing awake?" he asked, and for the first time I heard anger in his voice, not concern. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, and he sighed as if I were an annoying child asking inconvenient questions. "Just solving some work problems." "Go back to bed, Lauren." But I didn't go back. I stood there, watching him, and realized I no longer recognized the man I had married. That David, who looked at me with impatience, was a stranger, and for the first time since it all began, I allowed the truth to knock on the door of my consciousness. My husband was hiding something from me. In the following days, I started investigating. I know it sounds like something an emotionally unstable person would do, and maybe I really was. When you feel like you're losing everything, you do things you never imagined being capable of doing. I started noticing the times when he said he was working late, started calling his office and discovering he had left hours before he told me. I started checking credit card statements and found charges at restaurants we had never been to together, at times when he was supposedly working. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, everything became crystal clear. I had left work early because I wasn't feeling well, a terrible migraine that made me dizzy and nauseous. I got home and saw Rachel's car parked on the street. I thought it was strange, because she hadn't told me she was coming, but I thought maybe she had come to surprise me. I entered the house quietly, without announcing my arrival, and that's when I heard it. Laughter coming from our bedroom. Her laughter, high-pitched and cheerful, and his, deep and intimate. My heart started beating so hard I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. I went up the stairs slowly, each step seeming like an eternity, each second stretching as if time had decided to torture me on purpose. When I got close to the bedroom door, which was ajar, I saw through the gap. They were sitting on my bed, on our bed, very close together, and David was holding Rachel's face with both hands, looking at her the way he used to look at me at the beginning of our relationship. I didn't see a kiss, I didn't see anything more explicit, but I didn't need to. The intimacy between them was obvious, the connection was palpable, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that my husband was having an affair with my younger sister. I went down the stairs in silence, left the house, got in the car, and drove without destination for hours. I cried until I had no more tears, screamed alone inside the car until my throat hurt, punched the steering wheel until my fingers tingled. How was it possible? How could the two people I loved most in the world betray me like that? My husband and my sister, weren't they supposed to be my allies, my family, my safe harbors? How could they look me in the eyes every day, sit at the table with me, hug me, and at the same time be doing that behind my back? When I got back home, it was already night. Rachel's car was no longer there, and David was in the living room watching television as if it were a completely normal day. "Where were you?" he asked without taking his eyes off the screen. "You said you weren't feeling well." I looked at him and felt a mixture of disgust and sadness so intense, I thought I was going to vomit right there. I didn't answer anything. I went to the guest room and locked the door, and it was there that I spent the whole night, curled up, hugging my knees and wondering how my life had turned into this nightmare. In the following days, I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator. He was a middle-aged man, with the face of someone who had seen everything in this life and wasn't surprised by anything anymore. I gave him all the information I had, all my suspicions, all the strange schedules and poorly told lies. He assured me that in 2 weeks he would have concrete answers. It was the longest 2 weeks of my life. I continued living with David, pretending everything was fine, smiling when he tried to talk, accepting his empty excuses about work. But inside, I was dead, just waiting for confirmation of what my heart already knew. When the investigator called me saying he had information, I knew it was the end. We met at a cafe, ironically the same cafe where I had met David 2 years ago. Life has these cruel ironies. He opened a brown folder full of photos, documents, text message records he had managed to recover. Everything was there. Photos of the two of them entering motels together. Messages exchanged on apps I didn't even know existed. Declarations of feelings, plans for the future. There were even conversations where they talked about me, about how hard it was to hide that relationship, about how they planned to tell me when the time was right, the right time. As if there were a right time to destroy someone's life. The investigator handed me a flash drive with all the digital evidence. Emails, message screenshots, audio files. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "Nobody deserves to go through this." I paid him the rest of what I owed and left there with that flash drive burning in my pocket, weighing as if it carried all the suffering in the world. When I got home, David was in the shower. I connected the flash drive to our computer and printed everything. Every photo, every message, every piece of evidence of the betrayal. I organized everything into individual envelopes, one for each family member who would be present at the family dinner scheduled for that Friday at my mother's house. My mother, my uncles, my cousins, everyone would be there. And Rachel would be there too. And David would be there too, because he always insisted on going to these family gatherings, always playing the role of the perfect son-in-law, the attentive husband. That week, I sent emails with the digital files, but asked everyone not to open them until I gave the signal. Some found it strange, but everyone agreed. My mother called me worried, asking if everything was okay. "It is, Mom," I lied. "It's just a surprise I want to give at dinner." She laughed excitedly, thinking it was something positive. If only she knew. Friday arrived, and I was strangely calm. I had cried so much in recent days that I had no more tears. I had felt so much anger that now only a cold and determined emptiness remained. I chose a red dress, not by chance. I wanted them to see that night exactly who I had become. No longer the naive Lauren who believed everything, but the Lauren who had discovered the truth and was ready to do justice. The dinner was beautiful, I have to admit. My mother had set the table with white linen tablecloth, flowers from the garden in the center, her best china. There was soft music playing in the background, jazz, the style my family always liked. Everyone was excited, talking, laughing, serving wine. Rachel arrived in a light blue dress, beautiful as always, and gave me a tight hug. "Hi, sis," she said, with that smile I used to think was genuine, and now saw as a mask. David was by my side, with his hand on my waist, playing the role of loving husband with cinematographic perfection. We ate normally. I even managed to eat something, although each forkful seemed like cardboard in my mouth. I participated in conversations, laughed at my uncle's jokes, complimented my mother's food, but the whole time my heart was beating fast, counting the minutes until the moment I had planned. I watched David and Rachel across the table, avoiding looking at each other, being too careful not to show excessive familiarity. How could they? How could they sit there, at that table with the whole family, knowing what they had done to me? When we finished the main course, and my mother started serving dessert, a lemon pie that was traditional at our gatherings, I felt it was time. My stomach churned. My hands became ice cold, but my determination was unshakable. That's when David did something completely unexpected. He stood up, picked up his wine glass and tapped it lightly with his knife on the crystal, making that sharp sound that calls attention. Everyone stopped talking and looked at him. My heart almost stopped. What was he doing? This wasn't in my script. This wasn't part of what I had planned. "I would like to make a toast," he began, with that calm smile I had learned to recognize as false. I looked at Rachel and saw panic in her eyes, as if she also didn't expect this. What was happening? "First, I want to thank you all for always welcoming me so well into this wonderful family," he continued, and my mother smiled proudly, having no idea what was about to come. "Especially, I want to thank Lauren, who was the person who brought me into this family." He paused, looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, and then his next words came out like an atomic bomb exploding in the middle of the dining room. "But there's something important I need to tell you all, something that can't be hidden anymore." He took a deep breath. "Rachel and I fell in love. I'm going to separate from Lauren." The silence that followed was so profound. You could hear the wall clock marking the seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if time had literally stopped, and the entire universe had frozen in that surreal instant. I looked at him, then at Rachel, and saw her hand over his, intertwined. She was crying, but not from sadness. They were tears of relief, as if she could finally stop pretending. My mother dropped the pie knife on the plate with a loud noise that broke the silence. My uncle stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. My younger cousin brought her hand to her mouth, horrified. And me? I just looked at all of them and said, in a voice that didn't even sound like mine, it was so calm, "Check your emails. Now." It was as if I had started a chain reaction. One by one, everyone grabbed their phones. The sound of notifications filled the room. Faces began to change expression, from confusion to shock, from shock to horror, from horror to anger. My mother looked at Rachel with an expression of total disbelief. My uncle looked at David with a hatred I had never seen in him before. "Lauren," David began, and I saw that he had gone pale. He didn't expect this. He thought he would control the narrative, that he would tell the story his way, that he would make me look like the villain, or the poor little thing, while he and Rachel looked like the romantic heroes who finally assumed their forbidden love. But I had changed the game. I had shown everyone exactly who they were. Liars, traitors, people who were capable of destroying an entire family because of pure selfishness. "No," I said, interrupting whatever he was going to say. "There's nothing you can say now that makes any difference. You both destroyed everything, and now everyone knows." Rachel started crying for real now, no longer from relief, but from shame. She tried to say something to my mother, but Mom raised her hand in a stop gesture, with tears streaming down her face. "No," she said with her voice choked. "Don't talk to me now. Don't you dare talk to me." That's when I stood up from the table. I grabbed my purse, put it on my shoulder, and looked for the last time at that scene. My husband and my sister still holding hands, everyone else with expressions of horror and disbelief. The beautiful table now looking like a scene from a Greek tragedy. "I hope you're very happy together," I said, and the irony in my voice was palpable. I hope it was worth destroying everything. I left that house without looking back. I got in my car, closed the door, and only then let the tears fall. But this time they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of liberation. I had done it. I had exposed the truth. I had shown everyone who they really were. And now, finally, I could start freeing myself from that nightmare. I drove home, that house that had been ours but was now just a building full of painful memories. I went in and started packing bags. I threw in my clothes, my books, my photos from the time before David. I left everything that had been ours, the gifts he had given me, the wedding photos, even my engagement ring that I took off my finger angrily and threw in the trash. I called my best friend, Claire, and she came to get me without asking questions, just hugged me when she saw my state, and took me to her house. The following weeks were the hardest of my life. There were days I could barely get out of bed, days I spent hours just staring at the wall, reliving every moment, every lie, every sign I had ignored. The physical pain was almost tangible, a weight on my chest that wouldn't let me breathe properly, a lump in my throat that wouldn't go down, a feeling of emptiness in my stomach that prevented me from eating. I lost 20 pounds in that first month. It seemed like my body was physically rejecting the reality of what had happened. The separation process was quick. David didn't contest anything, probably out of shame or fear of more exposure. We divided the assets. I kept my part and left behind everything that reminded me of him. My mother called me every day, crying, asking for forgiveness for not having noticed, saying she had cut off relations with Rachel. "She's no longer my daughter," Mom said between sobs. But I asked her not to do that because of me. although inside I wanted Rachel to pay for everything she had done. My sister tried to call me countless times. She sent long messages apologizing, saying it hadn't been intentional, that love had happened without them wanting it, that she suffered as much as I did with that situation. I blocked her number. I didn't want to hear justifications. I didn't want empty apologies. There's no excuse for what they did. There's no love happened when you betray your sister, when you destroy a family, when you lie looking into the eyes of someone who loves you. I started therapy in a desperate attempt not to sink completely. My therapist, Dr. Morrison, was a woman about 50 years old with a soft voice and kind eyes that seemed to see through all my masks. She was the one who helped me understand that I wasn't to blame for anything, that people make choices and those choices weren't about me or about something I had done wrong. You could have been the perfect partner, and he still would have cheated, she told me in one of the sessions, because betrayal is about his character, not about your worth. But even knowing this rationally, it was hard not to blame myself. I spent hours wondering where I had gone wrong, what I could have done differently, if I had been a bad wife, a bad sister. I revisited every conversation, every decision, looking for the exact moment when everything had started to fall apart. Dr. Morrison had to constantly remind me that I was looking for logic where there was none, trying to understand what was simply inexplicable. 3 months after that terrible night, I made a decision. I was going to leave Atlanta. That city was too full of memories, full of places where I had been happy with him, full of people who knew our story and looked at me with that pity I hated. I needed a complete fresh start, far from everything that reminded me of that phase of my life. That's how I moved to Nashville. I chose that city almost randomly. I had visited once years ago and liked the energy, the music that seemed to come from every corner, the feeling that people went there to restart their lives. I rented a small apartment in the East Nashville neighborhood, on a quiet street with old trees and colorful houses. It was a small but cozy studio, with a large window that let in the morning light, and a small balcony from where I could watch the sunset. The rebuilding process was slow and painful. It wasn't that miraculous transformation you see in movies, where the protagonist has a moment of revelation and suddenly is healed and happy. It was more like climbing a mountain in the dark, stumbling over every stone, falling several times, but continuing to climb, because staying still would mean giving up completely. I went back to school. I had abandoned my master's degree in business administration years ago when I got married, and now I decided to resume it. I enrolled in an online program that allowed me to study at my own pace, and I dove into books as if they were life rafts in a turbulent sea. It was easier to focus on management theories and market analysis than to think about my destroyed personal life. I started doing things alone for the first time in years. I went to the movies without company, walked through the city parks listening to music on my headphones, discovered cafes and restaurants and sat at tables for two alone without caring about curious looks. At first it was uncomfortable. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if everyone could see the word rejected written on my forehead. But over time, I learned to enjoy my own company. I learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. I made new friends too, people who didn't know my story, who saw me just as Lauren, the new girl who had moved to Nashville and was starting a new life. There was Hannah, a barista at the cafe I frequented, who had a contagious laugh and always recommended the best live music shows around the city. There was Marcus, my upstairs neighbor, a musician who played guitar on the porch on Sunday afternoons, and sometimes invited me to share a beer while we watched the sunset. I started taking care of myself for real for the first time in a long time. I enrolled in a gym and discovered that working out was an incredible way to release all that anger and pain I was carrying. I started with yoga, seeking to calm my chaotic mind, and gradually incorporated running, weight training, dance classes. It was therapeutic to feel my body getting stronger, to feel that I had control over at least this part of my life. I changed my look too. I cut my hair very short, quite different from the long hair I always kept because David liked it. I dyed some highlights blonde on an impulse one Saturday afternoon. I bought clothes I really liked, no longer thinking about what he would approve of. Each small change was an act of reclaiming my identity, a reminder that I existed independently of him, independently of that relationship that had consumed so much of who I was. Therapy continued to be my anchor. Once a week, I would sit in that cozy office and pour out everything. The anger I still felt, the sadness that sometimes caught me by surprise, the doubts that haunted me in the middle of the night. Dr. Morrison, who I now did sessions with via video call, helped me process each feeling without judgment, taught me that healing isn't linear, that having bad days didn't mean I was regressing. I completely avoided social media. I didn't want to know about David and Rachel's lives. I didn't want to see if they were together publicly. I didn't want to feed that wound with updates about people I was trying to forget. I blocked both of them on all platforms and asked my friends not to tell me anything about them. What they were doing was no longer my business, and the less I knew, the faster I could move forward. My mother and I rebuilt our relationship gradually. At first, our conversations were tense, full of uncomfortable pauses and tears on both sides. She felt guilty, as if she should have noticed something, as if she had failed me somehow. "I raised that girl," she would say, crying, referring to Rachel. How didn't I see she was capable of doing something so terrible? I had to constantly reassure her that it wasn't her fault, that people make choices, and sometimes not even a mother can predict or control those choices. Over time, our conversations became lighter. We managed to talk about other things besides the betrayal. We managed to laugh together again. We managed to make plans for the future. She came to visit me in Nashville after 6 months, and we spent a wonderful weekend exploring the city, listening to live music on Broadway, eating hot chicken that burned our mouths, but was too delicious to stop eating. It was good to have her there. It was good to see that our relationship had survived even after everything that had happened. As for Rachel, she never stopped trying to contact me. The messages kept coming, even though I had blocked everything I could. She created new numbers, new email accounts, always with excuses, always asking for a chance to explain. Once she even showed up in Atlanta at my cousin's house, knowing I would be there for a birthday party. I left through the back door and went home. I wasn't ready to see her. I wasn't ready to hear what she had to say. Maybe I never would be. 1 year after that terrible night at the family dinner, I woke up on a Saturday morning and noticed something different. I went on my morning walk at Shelby Park, with my headphones playing that playlist of songs I loved, and in the middle of the way I caught myself smiling alone, for no specific reason. The sun was beautiful, filtering through the trees. There were children laughing on the playground. An elderly couple was walking hand in front of me, and for the first time in a long time, I looked at all of that and felt hope. I stopped at a bench, and it was curious that it was a bench, just like it had been at Grant Park where David and I used to sit, but this time there was no painful nostalgia associated with it. It was just a bench in a beautiful park on a sunny morning. I sat there for a while, just watching life happen around me, and I realized that I had survived. I had gone through the hell of betrayal, the agony of discovery, the pain of separation, the loneliness of rebuilding, and I was there, on the other side, still standing, still breathing, still capable of smiling. I won't lie and say the pain disappeared completely. It didn't. There were still nights when I would wake up in the dark and remember some happy moment with him, and the sadness would come back like a wave swallowing me. There were still days when I would see sisters together on the street and feel a tightness in my chest, remembering what Rachel had done, what we had lost. There were still moments when I caught myself wondering if they were happy together, if the betrayal had been worth it for them, if they felt any remorse. But these moments became increasingly rare and increasingly shorter, and between them, there were more and more moments of peace, contentment, genuine joy. I completed my master's degree and got an incredible job at a consulting company in Nashville. I took a solo trip to Colorado and spent a week exploring the Rocky Mountains, hiking trails that challenged me physically, but rewarded me with views so stunning I was left speechless. I adopted a cat from a local shelter, an orange kitty I called Sunny, who slept curled up on my belly every night and purred so loudly it sounded like a little motor. I learned to redefine what it meant to be happy. Before I thought happiness was having someone by my side, it was sharing life with a partner, it was building a future together. But I discovered that happiness could be much simpler and much deeper than that. Happiness was waking up on a Sunday morning with no commitment whatsoever and deciding to spend the whole day in pajamas reading a book. Happiness was talking for hours with a friend drinking wine on a porch. Happiness was finally being able to make that complicated recipe I had tried 3 times before. Happiness was making plans that involved only me, my dreams, my goals, without having to consult or consider anyone else. And I also learned that losing someone, as painful as it may be at the moment, is sometimes actually gaining yourself back. When I was with David, I had become a smaller version of myself, a version that always adapted to his preferences, that set aside her own dreams to support his, that was content to be a supporting character in her own life. Now, alone, I had to be the protagonist by default, and I discovered that I liked this role. I discovered that I was much stronger, more capable, more interesting than I had allowed myself to be while trying to be the perfect wife. Almost 2 years after everything, I was at a cafe in Nashville. Yes, another cafe, because apparently places like this have a special meaning in my story, when I received a message. It was from my cousin, telling me that David and Rachel had separated. Apparently, the relationship that had seemed so intense and passionate that it justified destroying an entire family had lasted less than a year after they finally got together officially. The irony didn't go unnoticed. My cousin expected me to be happy with the news, to feel some satisfaction knowing they had failed. But surprisingly, I didn't feel any of that. I didn't feel joy or sadness. I didn't feel satisfied revenge or pity. I felt just indifference. And that's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had finally freed myself. When you can hear about your ex and feel absolutely nothing, neither positive nor negative, that's when you've really turned the page. I responded to my cousin saying I hoped they both found happiness somehow, and that I had found mine, and it was true. I had found a version of happiness that didn't depend on anyone else, that wasn't anchored in relationships or external validations. It was a happiness built on the solid foundation of self-knowledge, self-care, and self-determination. Rachel tried to contact me again after her separation. This time she managed to reach me through a mutual friend who didn't know the whole story. The message was long, full of apologies and explanations about how she had been immature, how she had confused fleeting passion with true love, how she had realized too late that she had destroyed the most important relationship of her life, the relationship with her own sister. I read the entire message, and for the first time I was able to do it without feeling anger burning in my chest. I didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. Forgiveness was something that maybe one day I could offer, but reconciliation was a completely different story. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt, and that's okay. Not every relationship needs to be saved. Sometimes, letting go is the healthiest way to move forward. Today, when I look back at that night at the family dinner, at that moment I considered the worst of my life. I see it differently. I'm not going to romanticize the suffering and say it was good or necessary. It wasn't. It was horrible. It was traumatic, and it left scars that may never completely disappear. But it forced a transformation that I probably wouldn't have had the courage to make otherwise. If David hadn't betrayed me, I probably would have continued in that lukewarm marriage, in that diminished version of myself, believing that was the most I deserved or could achieve. I would have continued being the Lauren who put everyone else's needs before her own, who accepted less than she deserved because she was afraid of being alone, who built her identity around being someone's wife, someone's sister, someone's daughter, never just Lauren. The betrayal, as cruel as it was, gave me something I didn't have before: freedom. Freedom to discover who I was without others' expectations. Freedom to make my own mistakes and my own choices. Freedom to build a life that made sense to me, not to a romantic ideal of what a relationship should be. And I discovered something fundamental in this process. You don't need another person to feel complete. The idea that we need an other half is so harmful because it places completeness always outside of you, always dependent on finding that magical person who will fill all the voids. But the truth is that you're already a whole orange. You're already complete exactly as you are. A partner should be complementary, not completing. Should add to your life, not be your life. Today, I date very differently. I go out with people when I feel like it, without the pressure of turning each date into a possible serious relationship. I'm clear about my boundaries, and I'm not afraid to communicate them from the beginning. I don't accept behaviors that make me question my own worth or sanity. And mainly, I'm not afraid of being alone. Because I learned that being with myself isn't a punishment, it's a gift. There's a man in my life now, James, who I met at a pottery class I started taking as a hobby. He's kind, funny, and most importantly, he's consistent. His actions match his words. When he says he'll call me, he calls. When he makes a date, he shows up. When something bothers him, he talks instead of creating drama. It's a calm, mature relationship, without that neurotic intensity I used to confuse with passion. I don't know if it will lead to something serious, and surprisingly, that's okay. I'm no longer desperate to find the love of my life, because I discovered that I am the love of my life. Anyone who enters my journey now is a bonus, not a necessity. It's a subtle but fundamental difference. My therapist told me in one of our last sessions that I had done incredible work on personal transformation. You took the worst thing that could have happened and transformed it into an opportunity for growth, she said. Not everyone can do that. I thanked her, but honestly, I don't feel I had much choice. It was grow or sink. It was rebuild myself or crumble completely. I chose to grow because the alternative was simply unacceptable. I still live in Nashville, and I love every aspect of this city. The music that echoes through the streets, the friendly people who always have a story to tell, the creative energy that seems to pulse in every corner. I bought my own apartment, a small but charming loft in an old area of the city that's being revitalized. It's my space, decorated my way, full of plants and books and art I chose because it speaks to me, not because it matches some couple aesthetic. I work in a position that challenges me intellectually and gives me a sense of purpose. I have friends who know me deeply and accept me completely. I have hobbies that bring me joy: pottery, running, volunteering at an animal shelter. I built a rich and meaningful life, and most importantly, I built it alone, with my own hands, from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Sometimes, when I pass by that cafe where I met David, I go in and order a cappuccino. I sit at the same table near the window where it all began, and I watch people coming and going, each with their own stories, their own joys and hidden pains. And I think about how unpredictable life is, how a casual encounter can change everything, for better or worse. But mainly I think about how, regardless of what happens, we always have the choice of how we're going to respond, what story we're going to tell about our experiences, what meaning we're going to extract from suffering. And the story I choose to tell is this: I survived. I rebuilt myself. I became stronger, wiser, more complete. The betrayal that should have destroyed me ended up being the catalyst for my greatest transformation. And if I could go back in time and avoid all this, honestly, I don't know if I would. Because the Lauren I am today, with all her healed wounds and learned lessons, is someone I like much more than the Lauren I was before. Innocent, yes, but also naive, dependent, willing to accept less than she deserved. If you're reading this, or rather, if you're watching this video and made it this far, and you're going through something similar, I want you to know some things. First, the pain you're feeling now is real and valid, and you have every right to feel it completely. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're being dramatic or exaggerated. Betrayal is traumatic, especially when it comes from people who were supposed to protect you. Second, it's going to hurt for a long time before it starts to get better, and that's okay. Healing isn't linear. You're going to have good days and bad days, sometimes in the same hour. You're going to have moments when you think you've overcome it, followed by moments when the pain comes back with everything. It's part of the process. Be patient with yourself. Third, and most important, you're not defined by what they did to you. You're not the person who was betrayed. You're not the victim. You're a complete and complex person who went through something terrible, but who continues to be much more than that experience. Don't let betrayal become your identity. And finally, as impossible as it may seem now, you're going to be happy again. Not in the same way you were before, because you're no longer the same person, and that's okay. You're going to build a new happiness, deeper, more authentic, more resilient, a happiness that doesn't depend on anyone but yourself. The journey of learning to trust people again is going to be difficult. I won't lie and say it's going to be easy to open your heart again after it's been destroyed like that. But also, don't let someone's betrayal turn you into a cynical and closed person. Not everyone is capable of betraying. Not every relationship is a lie. There are good people in the world. People who value loyalty and honesty as much as you do. As for forgiveness, and I know someone's going to ask, I don't feel it's necessary to forgive in order to move forward. There's a whole self-help industry that tells you that you need to forgive your offenders to free yourself, but I disagree. You need to free yourself from the anger that consumes you. Yes, but that's not the same thing as forgiveness. You can let go without forgiving. You can move forward without reconciling. You can find peace without ever talking to these people again. Do what's best for you, not what other people think you should do. And if you're someone who betrayed, because I know these people also watch this type of content, please understand the size of the damage you cause. It's not just about the relationship that ends. It's about the trust that the person will have difficulty rebuilding for the rest of their life. It's about the self-image that gets destroyed. It's about the family that gets divided. It's about the emotional scars that take years to heal, if they heal at all. Love happened isn't an excuse. You always have a choice. You can always be honest, always end things before starting something new, always do the right thing. Looking at my journey now, with the benefit of perspective and time, I clearly see that some of the greatest blessings come disguised as the worst tragedies. That terrible night at the family dinner seemed like the end of my life, but it was actually the beginning of a much better life, more authentic, more aligned with who I really am. I learned that self-love isn't selfishness, it's survival. I learned that being alone is infinitely better than being in a relationship where you feel alone. I learned that family isn't always who shares your blood, but who chooses to stay by your side when everything falls apart. I learned that your peace of mind is more important than any relationship, and that nobody, absolutely nobody, is worth sacrificing your sanity for. And I learned that resilience isn't about never falling. It's about always getting up. It's about looking at the abyss, feeling the terror of being on the edge of it, and even so deciding to take a step back and rebuild. It's about transforming pain into purpose, transforming betrayal into growth, transforming loss into gain in another way. Today I know that sometimes losing someone is finding yourself again, that some goodbyes are actually beginnings in disguise, that the end of a chapter doesn't mean the end of the story. It just means you're ready to write the next one, and this time you're in command of the narrative. If this story touched you in some way, leave a heart in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories of overcoming, and remember, you're never alone in this journey. There are thousands of people going through similar situations, feeling similar pains, rebuilding similar lives. And if I could do it, you can too. Sometimes pain comes to show you that you deserve much more than you were accepting. Sometimes you need to have your heart broken to realize you can survive with the pieces. And sometimes you need to lose everything to discover that you already had inside you everything you really needed. Thank you for listening to me until here. Thank you for giving space to my story, to my pain, to my healing. And remember, no matter what you're going through now, no matter how dark the tunnel seems, there's light on the other side. You just need to keep walking, one step at a time, until you get there. And when you arrive, you're going to look back and realize that it was the journey, not the destination, that transformed you into who you needed to become. You're stronger than you imagine. You're more resilient than you think. And you deserve a love that doesn't need to be secret, that doesn't need lies, that doesn't destroy anyone to exist. You deserve a love that builds you, not destroys you. And above all, you deserve the most important love of all, your own. Until the next story, take care of yourself, value yourself, and never, ever accept less than you deserve, because you deserve the whole world.